And we are back with Min Sook Lee, the director of Migrant Dreams, which will be airing at this year's Hot Docs Film Festival. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'm very interested in this documentary, and we were talking a little bit before we got on camera just about the topic of indentured labor. Is that the right word?
It's really interesting because we would like to think feudalism and indentured labor does not exist in our country.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Or in this day and age.
Absolutely. But in Canada, we have a migrant worker program that looks a lot like indentured labor.
So you were telling me about how these women, specifically in your film, how they're brought here, and under the pretenses, the false pretenses of which they are brought here, they have to pay for the privilege of taking on these incredibly low-paying jobs, which then they spend years paying off before they even make any money. This is clearly not legal, so how is it happening?
There are a lot of ways in which laws are being broken, in which labor and human rights are being violated within the confines of Canada's temporary foreign labor program. And I think the reason it's happening is because these programs, which were started in the 1960s, have grown exponentially. We now have over 100,000 low-wage migrant workers in Canada. We have 500,000 workers who are here as temporary workers with temporary status. That's a significant number. And the programs have grown, and yet the government is not monitoring or regulating.
Okay, because that was what I was going to ask. Is nobody monitoring this?
No, virtually none. And so you have situations in which workers' precarity or their vulnerability is constructed by the rules of the program. And one of the key rules of the program is that low-wage migrant workers come into Canada in which their status is tied to their employer. Mm-hmm. That's why people say it looks a lot like indentured labor.
Right.
Because when they are here in Canada, they work in one job site, they have no labor mobility. They cannot exercise a freedom to move from one site to another if they're not happy with how they're treated. If the living accommodations, and I've seen these, where you have 36 workers living in an unheated garage, and the living quarters look more like a refugee camp than what someone would be living in, particularly in this country, where we pride ourselves on these ideas of labor and human rights. And I think that's the challenge. When we're looking in our own backyard, it can become very uncomfortable.
Yes, absolutely, because just hearing about this, it makes me just shocked that we live in a society, a first world country where these things don't happen here. This is not your first foray into the topic of, work issues and how workers are treated. And you've had some huge success with previous films in terms of the impact they've had on those societies. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
I would like to think that the work I've done has had some significant impact. At the same time, there's a lot of danger, or there's a lot at stake in terms of making these kinds of films, and that the first documentary I created with the National Film Board about migrant workers in Canada, I was served with a libel suit of $1 million. So you're talking about an industry that's quite litigious. It's a lot easier to point the finger across the ocean and say there's human rights abuses happening there, because the likelihood of being served with libel defamation is, come get me. Whereas if you're doing it in your own backyard, those individuals are very sensitive to how their industry is portrayed here. It's a local story, and it's a story that really does deserve attention, because what's happening now in the temporary foreign worker program is that there are private recruiters who are charging upwards to $14,000 to low-wage migrant workers for the privilege of coming into Canada to do minimum wage jobs, picking worms, cleaning hotels, picking the apples, that Canadians don't want to do. And we call them 3D jobs, dirty, difficult, and dangerous. And a good question is, why don't Canadians want to do these jobs? Well, if there's no incentive for employers to provide safe work conditions, to pay fair wages that are comparable to the living standards in this country, then who will do that work? And how do you then, if there's no incentive to work for employers to clean up their act, then you have this captive labor force that are unfree to move and who have very little ability to advocate for labor or human rights conditions, which are abysmal.
Well, the term whistleblower has become so mainstream lately with folks like Edward Snowden and Anonymous. I think it's a very catchphrase kind of term, but I, for one, am very grateful for people like you who bring these stories to light, because I would never have known this existed in my own backyard. I'm shocked and I'm disturbed, and I'm very excited to see your film to see what can be done. So it's playing at Hot Docs. Visit hotdocs.ca and find out when you can see Migrant Dreams, because not all dreams are the stuff we want to dream of. Some dreams are actually nightmares, and this sounds like one of those.